can refer any project to the agency.
And who's that?
The Director of Development Services, Phil Anseving. Also, the Principal Urban Designer comes into play in this scenario as well, providing advice instead of the design review boards. Same situation, same threshold in the DSP zoned properties. These are outside the redevelopment area, properties along Colorado and the East Broadway area. Transfer of design review would be to the City Council. Again, same 10,000 square foot threshold. Again, the Principal Urban Designer would also provide advice instead of the Design Review Board. All other projects would be reviewed by the Director of Planning, again with the option to refer any project to Council as well. For the discretionary permits, like conditional use permits and variances, when the agency is the design review authority, the transfer of review of these permits is consistent with that 10,000 square foot threshold I explained. Again, the same situation, but it would be the City Council City Council in both situations. One in redevelopment areas, one in the downtown specific plan zone properties outside the project area. Sign programs and parking exceptions. Sign programs would be consistent, reviewed consistently with the transfer of approval authority. And in redevelopment project areas, parking exceptions are still an available choice in lieu of a parking reduction permit or a parking use permit. And this is at the discretion of the applicant to choose that option. Again, this just...
Mr. Sefkin.
Before you go any further, let me give you an example of what happened like BJ's restaurant.
Okay.
There is no additional square footage.
Correct.
It's an existing building. Nevertheless, for the design, it had to come to City Council. I mean, it had to come to the redevelopment agency. Under this ordinance, would that happen again?
For the sign?
No. It was not for the, it was a facade renovation. There is no additional square footage, but it had to come to the agency under the old rules for design review. And then for the sign, had to go to the ZA and get approval for that sign, and then come back probably for the design of it.
BJ's is in the redevelopment area. In this case, it would be to the discretion of Phil Lansfame, the Director of Development Services. He could have the discretion to either approve it or review it and or refer it to the agency.
Under the new proposal?
Under the new proposal.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, if I might add, a current practice is for facades that just have minor modifications that don't really change the architectural style. Staff is reviewing those administratively, consistent with what we do in our permit service center. Something like BJ's that we does change the architectural character, we have referred to the redevelopment agency under that same able to refer to the agency at any
So
time.
it doesn't have to be 10,000 square feet. If you felt that it was important enough for the agency to see because it puts out, let's say, a different trend or whatever, then you will direct that to
That's
come
right.
to the agency.
BJ's is a good example. It is on Main and Main Street, and it really does change the character. In-N-Out Burger was another one where we did the same type of, we referred it to the agency because of the prominence and importance of that change.
So a new use in an existing building, even though not 10,000 square feet, even though not new construction, in the central project area, by policy, we would bring those to you, just given the nature of the change and impact in the downtown.
Unless there's something that's very modest that doesn't change the architectural style.
When the Planning Commission reviewed these exhibits, their concerns were the following. They were concerned about the lack of opportunity for public input, no appellant process, some concerns if the principal urban designer leaves or is unable to perform his review. Design review standards in the San Fernando Road corridor are not as well developed as the downtown specific plan, and also concerns of 5 minutes during the public comment section not being sufficient enough to address the issues of multiple permit requests. Some options to consider to address the lack of opportunity to appeal. The agency council can consider a reconsideration process similar to that of the Environmental and Planning Board. It's a reconsideration filed within 7 days of the date of the decision, and then the approval authority can relook at it and revise or modify its previous decision. Alternatively,
Their concern is in a situation when the agency and council is the reviewing body, or their concern is, let's say, in a situation that is 8,000 square foot of addition in downtown, and it goes to Phil Lanzafane, and he approves it. Which one is it?
Their concern is when the council agency reviews the project holistically, and they're also considering perhaps a conditional use permit or a variance in addition to being the design review authority, that there's a lack of appeal process in that situation.
Because currently, if somebody is dissatisfied with the zoning administrator's decision, they can then appeal that to the BZA, and then the BZA's decision to the City Council.
But the City Council is the one who's making the decision in here on this case.
Yes, but then in theory, the idea of having appeal opportunities is that you get to have your case heard several times by different bodies who may have different focuses and different interests. And to have one review for something like a variance or a CUP was of concern to the Planning Commission, that since the City Council or the agency in a joint meeting would be the final approval authority in the city, then beyond you, there would be no other body to appeal to other than the courts, and that was of concern to them.
Okay, and the city attorney question on the same item. Currently, if a city council makes a decision, would the same city council or the agency have the right to revisit their decision?
Only under certain circumstances. It would have to still be wholly executory if it's a private project. In other words, somebody hadn't gone out and relied on your decision, you'd have to put it back on the agenda, notice a public hearing to rescind your prior action. Normally, a circumstance where you have an appellate review ladder, if you will, where they climb ultimately to the City Council makes their decision, the next stop is Superior Court.
Yeah, but let's say in this case, through these processes, let's take BJ's again, we approved it. Somebody walks in and next week and says, you know what, I have an objection to this, I don't like the copper material. I want you to rescind your vote or reconsider it. If 3 agency members say, you know what, come and think about it, we don't like that copper either, can they do that?
As I indicated before, it depends on whether or not someone has relied to their detriment on your decision. If they've taken steps in reliance on your decision, begun to incur expenses, architectural fees, and begun to actually act on it, there may be a chance you cannot, because you're operating, essentially rescission is a parliamentary tool under Robert's Rules of Order.
Okay, so this 7 days basically allows the applicant not to go out there and incur
if they incur expenses, they're doing it at their own risk.
Right.
So
this way, this is what it is. Okay.
Yes.
Got it. Now I understand. Thank you.
Now, one of the things that I always hear when we get the appeals is that this is a de novo appeal. You're not bound in any way, shape, or form by the decision of either whether it's the BZA or the zoning administrator. And the council has never, I don't think, felt obligated to accept, to shift the burden in any way because the BZA has voted a certain way, or planning commission, or whoever it was. So in the end, it's coming directly to the final arbiter anyway. And we are instructed to disregard the decisions and in fact, the evidence that was presented beforehand. The evidence that was presented we can't even take notice of that. Unless it's in,
It is somewhat of a limited de novo review because you do have written materials before you that you can review. The file is available for your review, and you can base your decision in whole or in part on that file information. The de novo review really comes into play, as you point out. One, you're not bound by any of the factual determinations made by, let's use the BZA as an example, by the BZA. You're not bound by any conclusions of law they come up with, and you're not bound by any of the testimony that they may have heard before.
right. So I guess my point is that it's coming to the ultimate authority anyway. It's like a case going directly to the Supreme Court. There are certain cases that have that ability involving, there's a few cases involving diplomats or something,
There's a rare number that only the Supreme Court can hear.
so it's coming right up to the, this is where the rubber meets the road anyway.
Right.
We're
We're
counting.
Right. That's at least where we were standing when we proposed this.
So I personally don't have a problem with the fact that there's no appeal process, because you're getting to the highest authority outside the courts in any event.
Right.
So just with that being said,
Right, and as another way to actually address that, where this is where the buck stops, is that what the expression is? So and I worked in another city where a lot of these discretionary reviews were done by the Planning Commission. And in those cities, the Planning Commission would make a decision to deny with prejudice or without prejudice. And that implied that an applicant could reapply to the same body with some modifications. And that was first where we were thinking that people could reapply to come to before the council agency, but that's different than an appeal process where you as a body could review the same application, and that was the idea behind the 7-day process that Kristen is outlining here.
Mr. Quintero.
Well, the one thing about a planning commission review would be that that is a sort of first step or a possibility for the public to be informed, to hear what the project's about. And so from my viewpoint, I mean, we're talking about two different opportunities for the public, one in front of the Planning Commission, the other in front of the redevelopment.
I think if I'm hearing you correctly, Mr. Quintero, you're saying that if you were to include as another review opportunity, the Planning Commission would be an appropriate authority. In fact, that is something we did present to the Planning Commission in their meeting.
Mr. Sefian.
I think the whole purpose of the exercise was the charts that she showed earlier on.
Right.
To kind of try to bring it into a point that it's a little bit more manageable what it is. Planning review by Planning Commission, that means you got to wait another 30 days. They don't meet every week. They meet once a month. You got to schedule it. So there goes another 30 days down the tube. So that's 4 more weeks, conceivably maybe 5 weeks. And then you got to wait, and then they have to make a decision to the city council, and we got to wait more. So ultimately, the city council has to make the decision, yay or nay. So in my mind, if 7 days is going to give them not the applicant, the appellant, an opportunity for reconsideration, it's actually a shorter period of time. It allows people to do that. As far as the applicant is concerned, if we deny a project, the applicant at any time has an opportunity to go back and resubmit a design that is more in keeping with what the agency or the council wanted. So they always have that opportunity. It's just that when they get an approval, if, let's say, some neighbors across the street or maybe some businesses wanted to, have this reconsidered, or they found some new facts that weren't able to bring up, then they can come in, and I'm assuming we would have the opportunity to hear what their issue is, either grant the hearing or not, or how does that work? So in 7 days, they fill an appeal process, and then that's scheduled automatically, or?
Right now,
How does that work?
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, Mr. Chair, members of the agency, right now for land use matters that are appealed to the city council, we did away with that two-step process.
Right.
It just now gets automatically calendared for city council, CUPs and variances. It really depends on what you want to do. If you want to have that, to reinstitute that two-step process for this kind of process, for the essentially a motion to reconsider, if you will,
Well,
or reconsideration, or just an automatic calendaring.
My issue is, and this is happening more and more with developers within the development community, which is one developer will try to slow down another developer's project, so they go around and they appeal cases. And so, they do this with EIRs. We know we have one case, one developer's doing from other cities doing this to us, and it has happened in the past, even in here, that, they didn't get the project, so, they're going to stick it to this guy, and they appeal every single avenue until it comes to that. And so how would this work? If I'm not a developer, I am just a business owner across the street. I found out something new. I come back and fill in a document that want to ask the agency or the council to basically reconsider this issue. Is there a fee with that, number one? Is it the same appeal fee, $500?
That would have to be determined to see how much work is involved.
Okay.
We try to have the fees. We want to make sure that the fees at least reflect the costs
Right. Number
of
two,
providing the service.
when would that be scheduled for hearing? Minimum 3 weeks, or can it be earlier?
It can be earlier. It depends on how fast staff can put together a report.
Right.
Again, if we're looking at this 7-day reconsideration process, and if we're looking at a process where it's direct calendar for the hearing itself, it depends on how fast. We need a minimum 10 days notice.
Right.
And then the time period for one staff putting together a report, and then the time period that we need to be able to
you
make sure
generally
the
have the
agenda
same
calendar is
report.
clear. There may be, depending on the format that's used, and right now there's the form, for example, for the appeals, ask a number of questions.
Yes.
Do you find if there was any errors of law? If so, what do you contend they were? Do you find there were a mistake of fact? And so I would presume that we would use something similar to that so that we could get those issues honed down.
So would you say the top line is going to be about 30 days?
I would say at least 30 days.
I would say so.
Mr. Starbird.
Well, I think this has been touched on a bit, but it just seems to me, given that, as you point out, Mr. Mayor, you get to start at the highest court of the land to begin with. Certainly a reconsideration should be something more rigorous than just, well, we didn't like your first answer, so we're going to come back and try it again, so let's go through the whole lengthy, till 2 in the morning public hearing process, because keep in mind, that can be some of these cases, in which case there ought to, if you're going to allow a reconsideration, there ought to be some kind of very rigorous evaluation of, okay, well, what was it about the first process that you didn't think you got a fair shake? Was there something we overlooked? Was there some evidence that came to light that we didn't have the benefit of? Rather than just, oh, all right, well, we'll do it twice. We heard you the first time, didn't get the answer you liked, so we'll come back and we'll do it all over again. That just seems to me, when you've got this coming to the same level initially, that just seems to me to be 2 bites of the same apple, and it just takes more time and more expense and more effort on your part, unless there's some rigorous standards for getting you there, like we used to have, where the council would take up, do we want to hear this again? So don't argue the case again, but tell us why you think it should be reconsidered, and then we'll decide whether we want to hear it again. Otherwise, the first decision is going to stand.
I agree with that viewpoint, that there should be at least a threshold that the council is willing to grant the reconsideration, and if so, then the briefs and the other thing.
That language actually already exists in 2.88 of the municipal code. It's just we carved out the land use exception.
Right.
If the council was inclined to want to have that put back in for this process,
Right.
we could easily
Right.
do that.
And I think we eliminate it because we almost seem to be hearing the whole case to decide whether to hear the case. That's why I'm suggesting, whether by policy of the council or you embed it in the municipal code, have some fairly rigorous tests that would say, you know what, you don't just get to have a rehearing because you didn't like the first decision. So here's what you have to show, and then that first preliminary reconsideration is, have they met that test to even get in the door and have us hear it again? Otherwise, no. So you're not arguing the merits of the case, you're arguing why you think it should be reheard again, what was left out, who didn't get a good shake in this whole thing, and have a pretty rigorous test. Otherwise, you'll just be hearing things twice.
Right.
Because these issues usually have strong emotions and feelings on both sides.
And generally, giving the legal analogy, it's not just, well, you didn't understand the facts right. It's going to be either the law or the standards were misapplied or misstated to you, or not a mistake of fact, but a mistake of law,
Right.
a type of thing. So go ahead, Hassan.
And if I may add to what the manager just said, there is a difference in the way that if you were to make the council agency the approval authority for, say, variances and CUPs for projects larger than 10,000 square feet, unlike the kind of reports that we give to the zoning administrator, whose sole job is the interpretation of the zoning code, we would be giving you a very detailed analysis of the findings that could or could not be made in a positive manner for a proposed conditional use permit or for a variance, so that you will have complete analysis in front of you when you make a decision. So you will get detailed analytical staff reports attached to a proposal for you. So when you make a decision, you will be feeling comfortable about your informed decision. And then if a 7-day this semi-appeal process is added, you can be sure that if and when a process passes the threshold that the city manager just outlined, you will again get a detailed staff report analyzing the proposed appeal or revisitation of the project. And the staff report will include how it may or may not be consistent with the analysis and what you need to consider. So it'll be a rigorous test at every level.
Mr. Starbuck.
And my other thought is that if you go with a reconsideration process, the period of time to actually get the matter before you, whether or not you're going to reconsider it, should happen fairly quickly.
Right.
Not necessarily the same process time period of a full reconsideration, but more of an expedited, okay, let's hear relatively quickly why you think it should be reconsidered, let's decide whether it's going to be or not, and do that in a rather expedited process.
And that would be taken as a vote of the whole body, not similar to the way we currently have a motion to reconsider, where someone from the prevailing side needs to.
The way it actually is in the code right now, and the phrase that's used is a broad discretionary phrase in the two-step process that we still use for non-land use matters, where the council in the first instance will make a determination if there is evidence of sufficient substantiality, I believe is the phrase that's used in the code. And so it gives you broad discretionary review. And as Jim said, the only problem with that standard is because it's so broad, sometimes applicants feel a very strong need to say, well, I need to explain almost their entire case in chief to be able to get you to the point where to try to convince you that there's sufficient evidence of sufficient substantiality for you to consider granting or denying it. I would be more inclined to ask staff to look at some more narrow, specific standards, like you pointed out, Mr. Mayor, some issues of law, perhaps, not whether or not we just disagree with the factual findings or the weighing of facts, but more issues of law and that type of a standard, as opposed to the broader standard that currently exists now in the code. And yes, it would be a majority. Essentially, the council could then vote, and I'm assuming that the council would want that if there was a 3-2 vote, for example, to hear the matter would then be put on the agenda for hearing.
Okay. Are we ready to hear from the public? Sure. Or you still have...
No, it's
There's
not
just
over.
a-
Is that it?
A few more options to consider. There's this and one more slide. Alternatively, for larger projects, when an applicant requests a development agreement, development agreements must be reviewed by the Planning Commission. In that situation, the Planning Commission could also consider any additional discretionary permit, like a CUP or variance, that could serve as the initial reviewing authority, and then that decision could be appealed by City Council, but that would only be in situations with a development agreement.
Is the development agreement required that they go to the Planning Commission?
Yes. And a development agreement is required in the downtown specific plan every time an applicant requests to take advantage of the incentives.
Okay.
And just the final option to address sort of the urban designer and when the process stops, the agency guidelines can designate the Director of Development Services, to appoint sort of a designee to address time concerns and limitations of the principal urban designer, similar to the way that it was done prior to the urban designer. A consultant could be could be hired to perform this function. So that basically summarizes the options to address some of the Planning Commission concerns. And then I'm just going to note one quick thing.
Whoa. You forgot the San Fernando corridor.
The San Fernando Road corridor, they're concerned about lack of design guidelines. There's actually design guidelines. The Cooper-Robertson plan is sort of the design guideline for the San Fernando Road corridor. It has design, zoning analysis, specific guidelines for different areas of the corridor, and I think they're still relevant to the corridor today. So those do exist.
And our principal urban designer is going to be updating all of our guidelines within the next two years, including those of mixed-use areas and San Fernando Road corridor.
But if there's a project that comes in tomorrow, there's enough in that document that will give Mr. Loomis the parameters that he knows what to do with.
We believe so.
Okay.
And then just regarding the time allotted for public comments, City Council has, and the Redevelopment Agency has a lot of flexibility in setting the time for testimony review. Just one final side note, a memo handed out this afternoon recommending a change to page 5 of the ordinance. Sort of a redundant sentence, a decision of the City Council shall become effective immediately. Sort of unnecessary, and staff proposes removal of that sentence. It doesn't change the substance of the ordinance.
Okay, Mr. Weaver.
The urban designer, if he's not here, you say you can hire a consultant. How long does it take to hire a consultant? 1 hour or 2 months?
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, we currently have 3 different design firms under retainer.
Okay, that's all I want to know.
Yeah, that's how we do it. We just have them
It's
available.
not hire one, you already have them in.
Yeah,
That is correct.
They'd already be retained.
Thank
We
you.
used to have them, too.
Right.
Okay. Is,
Now he can get sick, he can go on vacation.
We actually prefer he work here all the time.
So, Alan, you need to make sure you perform. There's 3
you're
other
done?
people
Okay.
standing there for your
Thank you.
job.
let's hear from the public. Rubik Ovanesian.
Yeah, I can call later, I'm not done with my...
Of course you can. Rodney Kahn.
Mr. Mayor.
Mayor?
Good afternoon, Mayor and City Council members. My name is Rodney Kahn, and my office is located here in the city of Glendale. I think I've spoken on this before, and I'll speak on it again. I think this is an excellent idea. I think any ordinance that streamlines the entitlement process is a very good thing. A couple questions and comments. Mr. Yosefian spoke about this being related to the San Fernando Road corridor. I want to make sure that that's true and that's the case, because there are parts of this document that, if you looked through, did not reference that. And in particular, if I look at the sign program, and I'm looking at this ordinance number, and there is no number, and there's item number 2, and if I look at...
Which page of the ordinance?
It's 1.
Page 1.
Page 1.
Okay.
And if I look at sentence number 3, it says, "The Glendale Redevelopment Agency shall have the authority to review and approve sign programs in those portions of the DSP zone within a redevelopment area." Obviously, in the San Fernando Road corridor, there's not a DSP zone. So just consistency throughout the document to make sure that this also references the San Fernando Road project area. The second item, just real quickly, and it's just cleanup stuff or just some comments. In terms of variances and conditional use permits, just in general, if you have the ability to have extensions, as you currently do in the zoning ordinance, it references the zoning administrator allowing time, an extension of time within, and I think it's for 1 year, to be able to extend that time frame. I didn't see anything in this ordinance that allows the city council to extend the CUP and the variances as well. And I think that that's something that should be either added or clarified. There was some comments made and there were some thoughts in the past, and I'm not sure where it went.
Mr. Yosefian?
clarification.
Sure.
My understanding is when zoning administrator gives a CUP, it's good for 2 years?
Yes.
Okay. So in order for anyone to get an extension of that CUP, do they have to have another hearing?
No, the way in the code is, it says the zoning administrator may extend the time within which the right or privilege granted under a variance or conditional use permit must be exercised for 1 additional year upon receipt of a written request from the applicant prior to expiration of such variance.
Okay. And so the question to the city attorney, could that be delegated to the development Mr. Lansdowne?
If they're the reviewing authority, but I know I see Mr. Garcia has the code there. My recollection is that extension is only for specific reasons. It's just not a broad, anyone can come in and say, I need a 1-year extension.
Let's assume you got a 200-unit,
some narrow areas.
14-story building, and it's taking you 3 years to get this thing through the entitlement. For example, you have gone through the 2 years, and you got all the stuff done, but right before you get your final on your plans and permits, you got another month to go, and all of a sudden you realize your variance is expiring. For a scenario like this, and I've seen this happen before, in a scenario like that, would you have to come to us, or since we approved that variance, they can just go to Mr. Lansdowne and say the council has already approved it?
Well, that would be something we'd have to embed in the ordinance, but right now, and I know staff is looking up the 1-year extension.
I'm looking at Chapter
The basis for it.
30.41, Permit Implementation Time Limits and Extensions.
Could it be done? The answer is yes. It just depends on where we embed it. Because right now, the reason the zoning administrator is the approval authority, ultimately, if there's an appeal of that, it still can go back to the zoning administrator, because the zoning administrator is in the chain of authority for rendering approvals or hearing motions for or hearing for motions to modify the terms or conditions of a variance or a CUP. So if the council wanted to
But you feel
embed
it's
that
cleaner
here,
if it comes to us?
well,
So it'll be consistent with everything else?
it may be, because you are the reviewing or approval authority. Likewise, with the Director of Development Services and certain things, perhaps it can go to him. We'd have to take a look at that. I'm just trying to go from fading memory as to the reasons and the basis for the 1-year extension.
Mr. Mayor, members of council, it looks to me like the provision that Mr. Khan is referencing, it references the zoning administrator or the applicable review authority higher up in that section. But what we'll do is we'll go through and make sure, if it's the council direction, that where it says the zoning administrator now, that it says the zoning administrator or applicable review authority in each applicable section. That way it's consistent. If that's your direction.
That's fine. That's fine.
May I ask a question just to make sure that we're not losing this? However, if you'd like to give that authority to the Development Services Director and to the Planning Director, depending on which area it is at, you might want to consider doing that, as opposed to having the applicant come before the review authority.
My view is to be as consistent as possible, so you don't have different rules. Just make it consistent.
Thank you. You have anything else, Mr. Khan? Okay. I know you were cut off.
It was brought up in the past, and maybe there's a reason, maybe it's a State Subdivision Map Act reason, I don't know, but I want to put it out there again. If we are looking at something that is a holistic process, it would make a lot of sense, especially for the downtown projects, to be able to have their tract map approved by the City Council as well. So your environmental document, your CUP, your variances, you also would have your design approval, and then the last piece of the puzzle for home ownership for the condos is the tract map. Now, that's not being included as part of this holistic approach. There may be a reason that it can't be, I'm not sure, but I wanted to put it out there for you as well.
Okay, thank you. We'll discuss that.
And Mr.
discuss
City
it now.
Attorney?
Planning Commission
Is that a requirement by the Planning Commission to approve?
We were having a sidebar discussion, so we missed part of that.
Okay, so we'll get to that. Let's go through the speakers.
No, they didn't understand what he was saying.
Yeah, they didn't hear. There was some conversation. The question is whether the track map whether or not the track map for a project previously approved by the agency of the council could come back to the agency or the council, or is there some requirement that it go to the Planning Commission?
Right, I got that.
Yeah, we'd have to look at that. I mean, generally, some of those things are controlled by the MAP Act. It either requires either Planning Commission or City Council. I don't think that's something that could be delegated to the agency, and he couldn't actually do it as part of this process because it's been noticed as just these particular review items and not the MAP Act. But we'll take a look at it and
It's
respond.
been my understanding it always goes to the Planning Commission, and we just basically do the ministerial part of it.
That's correct. Although some subdivisions do go to you as the decision maker as opposed
Thank
to just
you.
an appeal.
You're welcome. Thank you very much.
Mr. Ovanesian, ready, or you want to pass?
Good afternoon. My name is Rubik Ovanesian, Cranbrook Realty Corporation. My office is in City of Glendale. I happen to reside in the City of Glendale. And what the staff are proposing is pretty similar to planned development. A lot of cities call it PD, and City of Burbank, our sister city adjacent, uses it effectively. I have actually asked the staff to proceed and try to do stuff like that. This ordinance is several years ago when we were working 5-6 years ago on the East Broadway. And I have, in general, it's a good thing. But I'm going to have to say today I would stand before you and ask you, the staff and the council, not to do this. I see this as a problem that is going to be created. Let's look back on what this council, and my comments, Mr. Draymond, are not toward you. You're the new kid on the block, and you haven't done some of this.
So
Mr. Mayor,
they're meant for us.
take some point. 2 years ago, your condo conversion, you championed that, you got it done, you told constituent you're changing it, nothing has been done. When we look at condo conversion standards today, it's like the clients have to pay a ransom, cut a deal with the council. And if you don't like him, council gets upset.
Wait. When
Let's
you
go
say
back. Let me
ransom
finish.
and
You
cut a
have my
deal.
5 minutes. Let me
I'll
finish.
stop the clock, but if you're going to start accusing us of
No, it's my
charging
comments I'm allowed
ransom
to
and
say.
holding people hostage,
Just
cutting
looking
a
at
deal,
the cases
that's
that has happened, sir.
certainly out of
let me
line,
finish,
Mr.
sir.
Ovanesian. But let's continue. Give him a few extra seconds. We don't want to cut him off.
Am I allowed to speak?
Of course.
Okay, condo conversion. 2 years ago, you championed, you changed it, nothing has been done. Clients look at it, it's a give and take. Keep pulling, how much do I need to pay, how many units do I have to do it? Total mess, total arbitrary. What has happened, the council is totally in charge. It's a power-hungry council. Let's look at another case. 3 years ago, Mr. Yusefian, you were the mayor, you championed Builder Bob. You have all these projects approved, they've been approved. How come they're not being built? Maybe they're the wrong design, maybe the wrong projects, wrong standards. I don't know. 14, 15, 16 variances, where are they? How come they're coming back for redesign? So looking at the track record of the council, I have to say, Mr. Starbuck, please, although this is a good thing, let's not do it with this council. This council doesn't have the expertise, doesn't have the educational background to deal with the code and the construction issues and the market conditions. Track record shows the projects are coming back for redesign. This council has been too receptive to receive contributions. Case in point, Councilman Quintero receives the contribution, approves the project, he says, doesn't affect my decision making. I don't know. Did it or didn't? It's not my call. My conscience is clear. It wasn't my project. Look at the requirements you're mentioning, 10,000 square feet or less or more, you're allowed to get bypass and jump the ropes and get through the process, cut the time frame. What about the little guy? What about the constituents? What about the little property owner, the big owner? We have tied up too many sites in the city for projects that have been approved. A good developer wants to come, wants to do a good project in town. Sites are hard to come by. What have we done? This council has approved projects, tied them up for on the locations, on the sites, on the properties for a number of years. Councilman Yusefian just said it. CUP is good for 2 years. Well, we can extend it. We have projects that have tied up sites for several years. Good projects, good developers come in, can't do it because this council has approved bad projects or wrong designs or wrong standards, not cost effective. Code is different than actually interpreting it, getting it designed, getting it financially feasible, and getting it constructed. It's a whole bag of tricks. East Broadway, it was done successfully. And the reason, experts worked on it. I have full confidence in the staff, full confidence in the director and the method he's proposing. But I have to today say, with this council, I would say no, let's not do it. This council becomes too power hungry to approve the projects. Thank you.
Well, I think it's fair to say that council has concerns with some of the local developers too, Mr. Ovanesyan, but we try to give them the benefit of any doubt. Certainly, we're a little bit restrained when we throw out insults at some of the local developers and accuse them of bribery and hostage-taking and being ignorant and uneducated. But certainly, I don't think there's probably a day that goes by that we don't think those things about one developer or another, not to mention any names. But I'm glad that you fully support Mr. Weaver and Mr. Draymond, and there's certainly two competent members of the City Council, and many times I put my faith in their opinion and their ability to go through issues. So never fear, I think the Council still is going in the right direction. Mr. Yusefian.
May I ask a couple of questions from Mr. Lanzafame or even Mr. Agani? The several large projects that we have currently, or we have been working on the last 3 years, have they disappeared? Are they in the process of EIR?
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, Mr. Chairman, no, they have not. There are several projects that are in the entitlement process. There are projects that have been entitled that did not develop, but that, I believe, is out of the control of this city council or this staff. That's a business decision by the property owner.
Okay, and the 3 large or 4 large projects that are out there, the two, I mean, we're talking about the hotel and the condo, the one on the 24-story condo, and then also the other one on Central. Which stage are they in?
They are nearing the completion. One of them, Intercorp at Orange and Wilson, is nearing its environmental review, nearing the end of its environmental review. That review closed to the public. There's now a preparation of comments. The others are finishing their environmental documents that would go out for public review for 45 days. That is a prerequisite to coming back to the redevelopment agency for final design review or any development agreements that might be required.
And is this a normal cycle that is followed?
Yes.
And in this proposal that the staff is recommending, would that section be modified in any way? Well, let's say we approve the project, DRB, would they still have to go through CEQA and their
Absolutely,
EIR?
yes.
And generally, how long does it take?
Prior to your seeing the final design review.
Right, and it won't change with this.
It will not.
So how long has it taken to go through this EIR process?
Depending on the size of the project, it could take 6 to 12 months just to prepare the document. Then there's a 45-day review period, a 10-day period if there's a regional comment, 10-day period for additional review, and then you could see that final document.
So in reality, when you show that chart and it says 3 to 4 weeks, what is missing in that 3 to 4 week section is this big, huge gaping hole of 12 months for the EIR.
And that's what Mr. Hagani had referred to in the beginning, and it could be up to that for the size of project.
Okay, so let's let's not forget that. Maybe in that chart we should stick that item in there, because people are under assumption that this council is going to have a developer walk in, write a little check to us, and we hand him the permit, and in 4 weeks he's out there building it. And in reality, that's not the case. They still have to go through all the processes. We're not cutting any process out. We're just reconfiguring it so it happens quicker. That's all.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Thank you. Barry Allen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, Mr. Chair, staff, and agency, and staff, and all the other folks that we have to talk to. Thank you for that, Mr. Yusefian. By the way, I'm Barry Allen. Those were some of the questions that I was going to ask, and at this point, we do have a number of projects that the public is saying, gee, what's going to be happening with Intercorp, with Verdugo Partners, the MEDI, the DPSS, really what's going on, and how long will this take? And earlier, speaking with Director Hagani about the process, this process doesn't take into consideration historical review, the Historical Society, and other reviews. So the question is, where will Glendale fall with regard to other cities in their streamlined process? With Los Angeles, with any of the other cities, I haven't seen that unless it was at some of the other meetings, because we're always comparing with other cities as to how we do and how they do, and who's better and who isn't, who pays more, who pays less. I think I don't know where that was in the process. The other issue, I think, goes to the politicization of the process of council review. The council, of course, if it's gone to redevelopment, has, of course, seen it and reviewed it. And I think one of the issues may be on the appellate process. If the council is the last step, should it be de novo or should it be on the record? And I think that might make a big difference. If you're looking at it from the record, it's truly an appeal process. But if you're looking at it brand new, there may be other testimony that you might hear that is different from what was heard during the entire process before. And I think our esteemed city attorney should be able to review that and make the suggestion as to whether it should be on the record or de novo. And I think that's an important process with regard to the council hearing any appeal in this process, because we don't want to have the appearance that it's a political process. We want to see that it's a governmental process and that there's no potential for the politicization of this particular issue. And I think that's pretty much it with regard to, I haven't seen any big chunks of time cut out, as Mr. Yusefian just pointed out, and so there's really not a lot of streamlining. Maybe we've shifted some of the processes around, but they're all still in place. We haven't shortened anything. And the question is, how can we shorten? And I think that should be the direction that the council and staff should take. Shorten the process. You're spending money on bringing people in to invest in Glendale, and if you can't do any better than you did before, and they still have to go through everything and then other reviews after that process is done, how excited are they going to be to spend their money here? Probably not very excited. I'm Barry Allen, and I thank you.
Mr. Starbird.
Well, quick observation on the issues raised by the last two speakers. One is we can only affect those processes that you have control over. One of the largest ones that you don't have control over is CEQA and the CEQA process. Every developer understands it. Every developer worth their salt knows it. They know it's a process they have to go through. We just administer it. You have, through this, attempted to affect one of the largest components of the process that you do have control over, and that is to get it to the highest authority in the city as quickly as possible. I'd like to point out, relative to your ability to impact a developer moving forward with the project, not on East Broadway, which was used as an example, two developments came in about the same time, spent about the same value on their land, projects relatively about the same size. One decides to move forward, one decides to not move forward and look at selling the land with entitlements. You have very little impact on that. That's driven by the marketplace and their own business philosophy. The same thing can be said for projects you've had come in during a very hot market for housing, for sale housing, which then cooled, and you saw not only here but throughout Southern California many projects for which developers decided, you know what, we'd rather try and sell it with entitlements than develop it ourselves and take the risks. That'll be some developers' philosophy. Other developers will say no, we'll continue to invest, and we'll look forward to the rebound, and we'll continue going forward. That's going to be the case. All you can hope to do is to affect the process that you can control. And this has a pretty significant impact on giving a developer some consistency of knowing how long the process is going to take, something that at least we've heard arguments before they haven't always known with the previous DRB process. Here they know they can get to kind of the highest judge of the land fairly quickly and get their answer.
Thank you. Let's hear from Mr. Astorian, and then we can. Can you wait? Mr. Astorian.
Good afternoon, Greg Astorian, Remax. If truly it is going to do a streamlined job, it's an absolute necessity. I will tell you, I represent a number of large projects in the downtown area, and this would be a welcome modification or an addition of sort. But if it truly cuts down the time as far as the staff part. We understand that the EIR and the CEQA process is something that the city does not have much of a control on, and it's their role is in an administrative role, so to say. But there are processes that if we can shorten it, it will help the development community tremendously. Now, there was a slide speaking of lack of opportunity to appeal, and I believe I watched that Planning Commission meeting, and there were some concerns about public input. My comment to that is as follows. For example, in the large projects, there was written that the projects that have to go through development agreement have to go back to the Planning Commission. If the purpose is public input, I believe that public does get enough opportunity to have input and say when these projects come in the different design review stages and or even public comment at the EIR time when they get to be processed. So I don't know what purpose it serves for this thing to go back to the Planning Commission at that time. I would like a clarification on that. And then I have a comment about the test of reconsideration. I'd like to know what kind of a test is going to be applied to that. If people are going to be appealing to you a project, and they ought to know what the guidelines are ahead of time. In other words, if whether it's discretionary or arbitrary, we need to know about that a tad more. With that, I totally support the streamlining of the process if it could be done. Thank you.
Thank you. No other cards. Therefore, I'm going to close the public hearing. Go to Mr. Yusefian.
And this is a question from staff. The issue of the EIR has come up. I know that we don't do the EIR. We hire a consultant. Actually, the applicant pays, and they hired they give it to us, and we hired a consultant, and they do the work, or they hired a consultant.
Well, let's clarify how it does work.
How does that work? Number one. Number two, do we have any control on the consultant's performa, which is we could set up a rule that says if you're going to be a consultant to do an EIR in this city, you have a turnaround time of X amount of time. Okay? So you have like 6 months. And I'll tell you why. Because I know some of these projects have the same consultant. Now, there's a good thing because they can share information. There's a bad thing. Too many things on their plate. And sometimes, and this city is not the only city they represent. They're a consulting firm. They're taking jobs like there's no tomorrow. And it's almost like being a contractor. When you have 15 houses to build, guess what? It's going to be a little bit slower than if you had only 4 houses to build. So what I want to know is, do we have ability to do that and say, if you can't deliver this in 6 months, you can't do the job. Let's find somebody who can actually deliver this in 6 months without compromise.
Let me answer. I'll answer the first question, Mr. Yusefian, and then which had to do with our process. Mm-hmm. The process, when it's a city project, meaning the city is the review authority, not the design review authority, the city would hire the consultant for the environmental review, and that would be paid for by the applicant. When the agency is the design review authority, I believe that the agency design, guidelines allow for the consultant to be hired directly by the applicant, and the EIR to be submitted to the city for the city's independent review, and that's usually what happens.
So let's take all the large projects downtown, all the large housing projects, Intracore, Amidi. They've all hired their consultant who works directly for them, and they submit a report to us. So they really control the timeline when they sign them up. Now, granted, they utilize the same EIR consultant because they've done the EIR and the DSP, and the sharing of information was probably going to be very important in that regard. But in that case, the developer hires the EIR consultant, and they essentially can negotiate and set the timeline. They just have to give us a complete product.
That's correct. And the only timing considerations are the public review periods for the EIR, but it's totally up to the contractual relationship between the client and the consultant, whether it be the developer or the city.
So in the second phase, if it's the city, can we ask the consultant to do that?
I'm sorry, would you repeat that question again?
I think this is the one I did hear. As opposed to when I was having the sidebar conversation earlier, the question is really, can we shorten or can we put a time limit on the consultant preparing the EIR? For example, if you can do the job within 6 months, great. If you can't, we're not going to hire you. Two things I think are important to note. One, under state law, an EIR has to be done within a year. There's the Sunset Drive Limited case, which can require that you can be writted into completing that EIR within a year. There's also been an argument, and we were the subject of that argument, but it never resulted in a judgment, where there can be a claim for damages if you don't have that EIR done within a year, particularly if we're the ones that hire the consultant. Can we send out an RFP for consultants and ask them if they can complete a project within 6 months? The answer is yes, but I'm not sure that you want to do that because, one, I'm not sure you're going to get these situations are so fact-driven depending upon the nature of the project and the nature of the sub-consultants that are necessary, and depending on what one finds when they're out there looking at certain particular issues involving the environment, whether it's endangered species, air quality, or something else.
So the short question is maybe, but it's not a good idea.
I wouldn't recommend it only because you may end up with an incomplete EIR, and then what happens if they haven't completed it within 6 months?
That's good enough for me.
You've got that outside time frame under state law anyway.
Is it fair to say, though, when we get a proposal to prepare an EIR in a large project, that will generally include the consultant's estimate of the time frame for preparing it?
They usually give us a critical path on each element.
So unless something goes wrong, you'll have a sense of how long the consultant thinks it's going to take them to complete the EIR. Going in?
If I may, Mr. Mayor, there is this misconception sometimes that staff has any control over the length of the EIR and or the consultant. Usually, the consultants do everything they can to write the EIR as quickly as possible because that's what they'd like to do to get to the next project and have more business. But first of all, we would be very suspicious of any consultant who overpromised in terms of the length of the EIR, because what usually delays the environmental review is not how fast the consultant or the city prepares it. The CEQA process is in fact a analysis and disclosure process. It's not a permit process. And some people think it's a permit process. It's not. It's you analyze the impact, you disclose it to the public, and the public has time to review and comment on it. Then you need to respond to public comment and review. And that is the time that is added to the length of the environmental review process, not so much the technical analysis. I'm sorry?
It takes you a year just to get the draft before it goes to the public. And I understand all of that section.
Right.
My issue is, can we shorten the draft part? Is there something we could do? Is there something we could do to give information quicker, faster to the consultant so they can prepare that draft so it can go out to the public so they can actually do what it was intended to do, to bring in the questions and so they can deal with it and so on and so forth?
Mr. Starber.
Well, in regard to information, there very well could be. I'm thinking of, for example, our traffic model. Preparing our traffic model and having that done was a big boost to all of these larger projects that have come in later. We've recently had a conversation about the sewer model on our sewer system, making sure we have those kinds of environmental models up to speed so that the consultants can rely on the basic data and they can then come in and, using our models, be able to predict what the impacts are of a project, is a way to facilitate an EIR consultant getting their work done, but can sometimes require the investment of a lot of money to prepare those models. You recall the downtown traffic model, that was a huge undertaking, a lot of effort. Needed to be done, but it was a big effort. Something like the sewer model may not take as much time. I think we're about to complete that. There may be other areas where I know recently we've had conversation about the historic assessment in the city, in the downtown area, completing that kind of an assessment so it could be available so it doesn't have to be done on a parcel-by-parcel basis could be something that could facilitate the EIR and make it easier for these developers to get the information they need. So maybe looking at those kinds of components of an EIR and making sure that our basic information is up to speed would be a way to facilitate it, if nothing else.
Right, and then to add, the downtown specific plan, for example, with adopting the downtown specific plan, you made very clear directions on what the regulations are, and so long as people meet the downtown specific plan standards, for the most part, they can use the environmental information that's in the EIR, and then a lot of times they will not need any EIR of their own. Once in a while, if the projects are pretty clear and not very impactful, they could be done with a mitigated negative declaration, which is done by staff, often really in a timely manner. That's another piece.
Mr. Sefian.
Hassan, I agree with Mr. Starbird. I think if there's a way you can come back to us later on to tell us what other models we need to have. I mean, we have the sewer model, it's working. We have the, I don't know if there's a trash model, if there is a whatever. I personally felt that we should do a citywide historic model or historic survey. I think that would help that section of it, of the EIR, instead of having to go to every single different person all the time, right off the bat. And also what the cost is. Because I'll tell you one thing, if we're going to do just the traffic, $1 million to do the mobility study, one of those projects, if it's built a year ahead, just the tax increment alone is going to be $1 million. So every year that is delayed, there is another $1 million that we just lose. Clock keeps going. So sometimes I think we need to be given the information so we could make the appropriate decisions. That would be very helpful.
Mr. Weaver.
If you look at the elements that are required in an environmental document, it's easy to discern which ones take the most time and effort. Traffic is one. Archaeology is not. What we need to do is put the emphasis where I think staff already knows it is, in the traffic and the other items that virtually every project in this town has to comply with. And I think we're nipping away at those. And when those models are there, you can forget about the archaeology. If somebody wants to go out and find some bones, like they did in the, one is the Galleria.
General Growth.
General Growth, like they found back east or attempted to find back east. That's fine, but for some, you just brush right over. They take no time and effort. So I think staff's going in the right direction with the major ones that might end up having to require some mitigation measures taken.
Mr. Scott, do we have something we can, I know there were several issues regarding the appeal and reconsideration that you said you needed to work on. Is this in any form to go forward at this point?
Actually, Mr. Garcia and I were having a sidebar conversation about that, and we think it is, with the direction of council. There's not a lot we have to do. We were just checking 2.88. Some of the language, for example, in rehearings that already exist, we could use that because that's a fairly narrow standard already. And just maybe some massaging of the language and making it clearer it would apply to this kind of a reconsideration process. So I think the conclusion between the two of us was that if you introduced it, it would be germane so that you could adopt an ordinance by next week, and we could fold that additional information into it within the next couple of days.
And you can deal with the San Fernando part that he says.
That's just I think that's just some clarification language that Mr. Khan requested, and that I think is fairly straightforward.
Well, then, in that case, I'd like to introduce the ordinance at 1A.
Mr. Quintero.
Okay, the ordinance has been introduced.
Still got B, so.
I'm absolutely for streamlining the process, because I do think in the downtown area and the San Fernando Road, we're obviously trying to encourage development, so I don't have any problems with that. Anything that moves the process along, we're all better off. My comments about the Planning Commission are I'll repeat them. I mean, I just think it's really a nominal time frame to do that one hearing. It could even be done prior to coming to the city council, not so much early in the process, maybe later in the process. But I just think the public needs more than one shot at the apple, if you want to call it that. I think we need to have a situation where people will be aware of these projects and will go and give them their input. I mean, the Planning Commission, that's why they're there. They're there to discuss planning in the city of Glendale. So I don't think it's going to particularly hold things up. But
Mr. Yusefian.
Mr. Mayor, I think the way, somebody correct me if I'm wrong, the way this process is, there will be a public hearing on design review preliminary, correct? That's one hearing.
For projects larger than 10,000 square feet.
Right. So we will have one hearing, and this will be preliminary, stage one. Okay. And then they will have to go back, do their EIR and all that stuff. Then they will come back, and then there'll be a second hearing. And the second hearing, we will approve their EIR. We will also go ahead and approve their design review. And if there's any variances that is pertinent to this, that will be also approved. So that will be the second hearing. A third hearing will be that if there is a major issue with this project, they have an opportunity for a reconsideration. So that will give them the third hearing. Now, if this is an agreement that is made through a development agreement, or it needs a subdivision or whatever, that will have to go to Planning Commission. That's a 4 hearing. Am I correct? So the public has opportunity 4 times to potentially
Up to 4.
Up to 4 times, because some they will not be going to the Planning Commission because it's not it. But most of the times they're gonna, the big ones, the ones that people have concern, they got 4 bites at the apple, as they say, since we're in the apple thing.
Okay. Mr. Weaver.
Well, let's do a little reality check. I think in my 11 years here, other than the town center, where public really got into it with us on design, whatever, all of these projects we're talking about in the future will be at 2:30 in the afternoon. The general public is going to get involved, wanting stuff. They're going to be in here asking us to do time certain 6 p.m. So the public can get here. Otherwise, other than the town center, I can't remember having crowds in here for it. We do it at 2:30, and the people that are promoting it are here, and we're lucky we have 1 or 2 others. So that's just reality, what will happen if you get down there in the reconsideration mode. If residents start saying, we don't like that building you approved down on South Brand or on Central, and we want it reconsidered, and we want you to move at 6 so we can all help you design it.
And most of those will be a joint meeting, because if you're going to approve a variance, it has to be the council.
Yep.
So,
Other stuff is in the afternoon, so.
Mr. Mayor, do we have to get
I think 1B is a separate
I was talking to
resolution.
legal
Howard.
about that.
And Mr. Mayor, members of the council, I'm recommending we take 1B off calendar. We're going to bring that back with the ordinance.
Okay.
Because we have to make a couple of changes on the extension, for example, that Mr. Khan raised. So rather than give you something that's incomplete, we'll make the changes and bring it back with the ordinance.
Mr. Draymond.
Well, I'm all for as much public input as possible, but I think this brings enough public input to it, and I think, based on my comments earlier on, I think everybody is well aware that at least where I stand on the issue of moving these projects forward, especially the larger projects, and I share Mr. Allen's comments and his. We seem to have dovetailed in the last go-around on this as well. This city has made a lot of promises to the public, to the business community, the development community, the residents, and so forth, as to how we're going to develop the downtown, and that it's going to happen sometime in our collective lifetimes. And if this will help to move it forward, in a way that doesn't abridge the public's right to input, I'm all for it. I also want to address something that Mr. Hovhanessian said. He left me out of the mix when he was taking his shots. I can assure you I am no more skilled or educated than my colleagues here. I just haven't been sitting here as long to make my lack of skills as a parent, perhaps. I don't know. But in any case, if you're worried about this particular council versus councils in the future, there is no requirement in our charter that our councils have any specific degrees or professional disciplines. The only thing that we bring, that's what our staff has, and you applaud them as we do as well. But the only thing we're required to bring is common sense, hopefully, and some judgment, hopefully. There's a reason that we're not required to have the expertise that you all have, and that's one of them. I don't think if you're worried about campaign contributions, I assure you that's still going to happen. It's happening now. It will happen in the future. It's the nature of the beast. It's up to us to, as candidates, when we are candidates, to sort of try to keep all of that in perspective. And anyway, I'm going to support this. I think it's good for us, and I'm glad we're going to bring the other half back, the second part back. So.
Very good.
You need a motion
That being
to-
said, I will move to adjourn for the Redevelopment Agency. Mr. Starbury?
Maybe I'm the only one misunderstood. In your description of DRB,
Yes.
in your description of the process, did you still have DRB recommendations coming back to the agency? I mean, you talked about 4 different hearings.
I think he meant design review by the agency.
By the agency.
Okay,
Stage one.
because you won't be getting design review
Right.
board recommendations.
Right, we'll
Okay.
have Alan Loomis's.
Okay, then I misunderstood. I thought you were describing the design review board process
I said
still.
stage
Okay.
1.
Okay.
So you move to adjourn.
Is there a second?
Second.
For agent.
We're adjourned for Redevelopment Agency. Move to adjourn for council?
Second.
City Council is adjourned.
Rainfall in Southern California this year is at a record low. This is a call for us to increase our efforts to conserve water. Glendale Water and Power is urging everyone to reduce water usage by 10%. That's only 20 gallons per person per day. We can all do our part by taking shorter showers, turning off the faucets while brushing our teeth, washing only full loads of laundry, and making sure our sprinklers are working properly. It's simple to save water. Together, we can all contribute to Glendale's water conservation goal.
The Glendale City Council meeting of July 24th.
Mic on? Your mic isn't on.
Testing?
It's on.
Testing? As I was saying, welcome and good evening. Welcome to the Glendale City Council meeting of July 24th, 2007. May we have the roll call, please?
Council members Draymond?
Here.
Quintero?
Here.
Weaver?
Here.
Yusefian?
Here.
Mayor Najarian?
Here. Mr. Draymond, will you please do the flag salute for us?
Please place your hand over your heart and repeat after me. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Please remain standing for this evening's invocation.
This week we will commemorate, by executive order from our President of the United States, National Korean War Veterans Armistice Day. Often referred to as the Forgotten War, this conflict took a heavy toll on Americans who were still recovering from their sacrifices in Europe and in the Pacific 5 years before. Just to give you an idea of this toll, dead Americans, 54,246. Wounded, 103,284. Captured, 7,140. Missing still, 8,177. Benjamin Franklin once said that there never was a good war or a bad peace. Sadly, too often in our history as human species sharing the same planet we call home, it takes a terrible war to appreciate an enduring peace. Tonight, let us join Americans around the country in prayer as our nation honors those who served and those who died and those who remain missing in parts unknown. Let us pray that we will soon see peace again in our lifetime and pray for the safety of every American who serves to defend our liberties. Amen.
May we have your report, please?
The agenda for the July 24, 2007 regular meeting of the Glendale City Council was posted on Thursday, July 19, 2007 on the bulletin board outside City Hall.
Thank you. May we have the next item?
3 is presentation and appointments. At 3A is agenda preview for the meeting of July 31st, 2007.
Mr. McFall.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. Next week, we'll begin the day at 9:30, once again continuing with the budget study session. The dialogue this morning started with the reserves, the status of reserves, and we'll continue that. In the Glendale Redevelopment Agency in the afternoon, there will be one item from the Director of Development Services regarding a status report on the February 13th, 2007 parking exception that was granted for the property located at 240 North Brand Boulevard, otherwise known as the Glendale Career College. There'll be a special meeting in the afternoon at 2:30. The Director of Parks, Recreation, and Community Services and the Director of Libraries will be presenting a report to Council on a discussion of a proposed ordinance adopting development fees for parks and libraries. That evening at the City Council meeting, there will be a number of items the Council will address. City Manager will be presenting a report regarding the League of California Cities Annual Conference and the voting delegate and alternative the Council will designate. The Director of Public Works will be submitting a report regarding the B-line service changes for Route 7. That's in Glen Oaks Canyon. And